Welcome to LA Controversial, your inside guide to the colourful side of life in the spotlight. She may only be 4'11" tall, but this Grammy-winning rapper from a broken home in Brooklyn likes to play with the big boys. Born Kimberly Denise Jones, she rose to fame as the Queen Bee of Notorious B.I.G.'s Junior Mafia in 1994. A year later, at the age of 21, Lil Kim's debut album rose to #2 on the Billboard Hot R&B Rap chart, and her duet with Puff Daddy, No Time, sat at #1 on the rap chart for a total of 9 weeks. In 2003, she was feeling invincible on the eve of the release of her third critically acclaimed album, La Bella Mafia.
Now everyone would see how versatile I am. I'm not just a rapper, I'm an entertainer. That means I do many different things. I can entertain in the bedroom. I can entertain on stage. I can entertain on a big screen. I want to do whatever the doors open up for me in this game.
Unfortunately for Lil Kim, however, it was the sound of doors closing that she'd be hearing 2 years later, when she was convicted of lying to a grand jury about her friend's involvement in a 2001 shootout outside a radio station in Manhattan. When the original case came to trial, Kim had told the jury that she didn't notice her manager Damian Butler and friend Sweet Jackson at the scene. However, video footage from that night clearly showed the three leaving together, and both men later pleaded guilty to gun charges. She copped 1 year and a day in the Philadelphia Detention Center, which most of her friends and fans seemed to think was pretty reasonable.
Considering everything that was surrounded about, I think the sentencing was fair. Like I said before, I don't think that she'll serve the full year. And I think that she'll come out and she'll still be the Queen Bee, as they call her.
She scored her own TV show called Lil Kim, The Countdown to Lockdown, and spent her time in prison watching her fourth album, The Naked Truth, go to #6 on the Billboard 200 chart. More recently, she explained how thinking about Nelson Mandela had helped get her through the tough times.
The man who taught us how to believe, and the man who taught us how to never give up. And he was very instrumental in my experience in prison. I thought about him.
But that wasn't to be the end of Queen Bee's legal troubles. 2 years later, she was sued for $2.5 million by her record company, who claimed she'd failed to deliver the recordings they'd paid for. Born in Wales in 1974, British actor Christian Bale is known for his portrayal of some rather shady characters. He exploded into the public consciousness at the age of 13, playing a boy trapped in a Japanese World War II internment camp in Empire of the Sun. After that, he cut his teeth in a string of independent films before landing the role of serial killer Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. Since then, he's played an anorexic, guilt-ridden paranoiac, a magician with a grudge, and of course the man in the black rubber suit. But all of the dark and brooding characters he's brought to the big screen haven't quite managed to exorcise Christian's own demons. In 2008, he was arrested after his mother and sister told British police that he'd assaulted them in his hotel suite before the European premiere of The Dark Knight. Christian denied the charges, which were later dropped. However, just a few months later, there could be no denying his tendency to let fly when a tape of his expletive-laden tirade on the set of Terminator Salvation found its way on to TMZ.com. The 10-minute rant was aimed at cinematographer Shane Hurlbut for allegedly walking behind co-star Bryce Dallas Howard and through Bale's line of sight, breaking one of the codes of on-set behavior. The violence and profanity of Christian's prolonged verbal assault, which included threats to trash the set's lights and demands that Shane be sacked, evoked outrage and inspired a rash of parodies on late-night TV. After a week of laying low, Christian rang up K-Rock Radio in Los Angeles to grovel, admitting that he'd acted like a punk and had been, quote, out of order beyond belief. He also made assurances that he and Shane had patched things up and that he only had the greatest respect for the cinematographer's talents. But there was a lot more bowing and scraping to come yet, with reporters continuing to hound him for comment at every public appearance for months afterwards.
Oh, you know what? There's really nothing I can say about that I haven't said already. And you know, I have never tried to make any excuses for it. It was unacceptable, and I take it, you know, it's my fault. That's it.
Thankfully, however, he did have the support of his colleagues to depend on.
So misunderstood. It really broke my heart to see what was happening, because he was nothing but courteous. I think he has a lot of, he's got a lot of integrity, and he was very polite to me and funny and just kind. So when I saw that happen, it just broke my, it really affected me, and I thought, so misunderstood. And I think it happens when you become a big celebrity.
Perhaps his biggest ally was the actor who has served as his faithful butler in both Batman films.
I'm absolutely amazed. He's not like that. He doesn't swear in conversation. And I think he did it for 10 minutes. I did it for 12 once, so I've beaten him. I understand absolutely what happened. And I would understand me doing it, but I didn't understand him doing it. I didn't think he was capable of that. He's such a nice, gentle soul. I mean, I'm rough and I can do the language and everything, but it never occurred to me that he could do it. But he did 10 minutes. I've done 12, so I've beaten him.
Daniel Radcliffe was just 12 years old when he faced the media at his first press conference to promote the first film in the Harry Potter series.
A long time ago, I read the first 2 books, and I have since then completely forgotten everything about it. So we've just started reading the first book, and I'm going to read after we finish the first, I'm going to read the 3rd and 4th.
He went on to become one of the most recognizable stars of young Hollywood, literally growing up before our eyes as the wholesome teenage wizard. Then suddenly, before we even had time to come to terms with the thought of his voice breaking, came the shocking news that little Daniel had signed up to strip off on stage as the lead character in the Peter Shaffer play, Equus.
Well, what a start, you know. I mean, he's fantastic. Kind of puts a kibosh on Harry Potter a bit, doesn't it? But, you know.
At 17 years of age, the prim and proper schoolboy was all grown up.
It was just a fantastic opportunity, and the nature of the play is such that it's a much more adult role in some ways, and certainly a lot more requires sort of a real discipline to it, especially if you're on stage the whole time and things. So I suppose there was an element of wanting to really prove I could do something else.
That something else involved swearing and smoking, as well as getting down to his birthday suit in the final scene.
The scene's about what happens at the end of the scene, which to the horses and things. So that's the main point of it. So the nudity for me was just something that came with the character. It wasn't something that either attracted me to the part or repelled me. It was just a thing.
Thankfully, he'd had time to get his gear back on before being forced to climb out of his dressing room window to escape from overexcited fans on opening night. The word diva was coined way back in 1883 from the Latin word for goddess. It was used in deference to the great female opera singers of the time. Since then, the word diva has been bestowed upon popular music legends like Judy Garland, Billie Holiday and Edith Piaf, all of whom have displayed as much passion and volatility offstage as on. But one more recent inductee into the Diva Hall of Fame isn't so sure she likes the title.
It's a very, very funny word. It can mean prima donna or goddess. Any given day you can be either or. I don't know. I'm Whitney. If diva is the word, and if that's what I am, and if I'm at the top of my class, if I'm the #1 diva, I'm fine. If I've got to be #2, I ain't cool with it.
By the time she signed a recording contract with Arista Records at the age of 19, she was ready to release the biggest-selling debut album of all time. The Greatest Love of All sat on top of the Billboard 200 album chart for 14 consecutive weeks. Released in 1987, her second album, Whitney, was another smash, but many black critics complained that her music was too white and that she was selling out with her good girl image. Perhaps it was her determination to shake free of that image that influenced her hookup with New Edition singer Bobby Brown. While many suggested the partnership was little more than a publicity ploy to buy Whitney some street cred, they were married in 1992, and Whitney gave birth to their daughter Bobby Christina the following year. At the height of her success in 1994, she went on a concert tour of South Africa as the first overseas artist to perform in the apartheid-free country. During the tour, she donated $1 million to South African children's charities, prompting then-President Nelson Mandela to make a glowing speech.
Merely to polish her shoes.
Oh, no!
And
no.
She is one of the priceless jewels of the anti-apartheid struggle. Her program, the planned donations, contributions towards the improvement of the living standards of children in the country shows the type of person she is. Whitney is one of the few who have done that, and that is why we love her so much.
My problems or my struggles or my strifes, the things that got me through those times were you, and thinking about you and what you must have been going through for all of us. And my Diva, I love you, and I'll cherish you for that all my life.
It was all a bit much for the emotional star, who was already starting to conjure up the rather less flattering connotations of the diva tag. Her increasingly erratic behaviour and frequently dazed public appearances were becoming the subject of widespread speculation. She started turning up late for photo shoots and recording sessions, as well as cancelling concerts and interviews. When she did turn up for shows, her shockingly skeletal frame had commentators worrying about her mental and physical health. In early 2000, she and Bobby were found to be carrying half an ounce of marijuana at Hawaii Airport. 2 months later, Whitney was scheduled to sing at the Academy Awards, but was sacked by Burt Bacharach after turning up late and mumbling incoherently at rehearsals. Her longtime friend and collaborator Clive Davis immediately went into damage control and talked up her next appearance at Arista's 25th anniversary concert.
I can tell you that I saw her in rehearsal last night and she was stunning. And that she just grabbed, even stagehands' mouths dropped when she started singing. So that I'm looking forward so much to her performance tonight. I expect it to be dazzling in every way.
Her peers also rallied round her.
I don't really know her. I don't know anything about her life. I don't know what I read, if it's true or not, because what I read about me normally isn't true, sometimes a little bit true. But I just wish her all the best, and whatever, I'll be right here, fans screaming in the background as I always am.
While those close to her did their best to keep up appearances, Whitney continued to ring alarm bells, with her no-shows and strange outbursts. On the Diane Sawyer Show in 2002, she famously answered questions about the drug rumors by claiming she made too much money to smoke a cheap drug like crack and declaring crack is whack. Meanwhile, Bobby was building up a tidy police record of sexual harassment, drink driving and assault charges. Whitney's spiraling drug abuse led to a trip to rehab, although she checked herself out after only 5 days, claiming she felt claustrophobic. But by 2006, she was in rehab again. This time she stayed the course, and in September she finally filed for separation from Bobby. Their divorce went through 6 months later, with Whitney winning full custody of Bobby Christina and giving her full attention to the job of being a mum.
I just had a different plan at this time of my life. My daughter was about, I think, 12, going on 13. I had moved out to LA, and I just rented a little house up there in the hills of Laguna, and I kind of got comfortable with being left alone, you know what I'm saying, with just being a mom who was her daughter after school and who would pick her up from school. And, you know, I liked that vibe. I liked the feeling because I never really had the opportunity.
Then she got the call from Clive Davis.
He called me one day and he says, it's time. And I said, yeah, time for what? And he says, it's time for you to come back and sing for us again. And I thought, Clive, it's not really where I'm at. He said, well, I want to hear it. Your mom wants to hear it. My mom was calling me saying, you know, Mommy, my mom was calling me too, and people was asking me, like, you know, if I go out to a store, when am I going to hear you sing again, you know? And I just thought, wow, that's very, very, very special, and I feel humbled to be, you know, asked to do it again and to want to be heard again. So
finally, in 2009, she was ready to release her comeback album. Upon its release in August, I Look at You shot straight to the top of the Billboard 200, delivering Whitney her first #1 album since The Bodyguard. Sadly, however, her live performances on her Nothing But Love tour weren't quite as well received. She was panned for her hoarse voice, which caused her to pause between notes, and for her disorientated mental state. One critic even suggested that the tour should have been named Whitney Houston, We Have a Problem. Despite that setback, Whitney is already planning another new album and showing the kind of passion and determination that propelled her to the rank of diva.
I just want to be recognized for my music and for what it does and how it inspires people and how it makes people feel, as opposed to talk about Whitney all the time, you know, kind of thing. That's all done and over with. That's passé, and I would just like to be, you know, recognized for my music.
Frequently described as one of the most beautiful women in the world, Ava Gardner was an old-school movie star. Glamorous and volatile, she was adored for her film roles, while her private life gave the gossip magazines of the day plenty of fodder. She could swear like a trooper, and once said revealingly, "When I lose my temper, honey, you can't find it anyplace." Ava was born dirt poor and grew up with 6 siblings on a farm in North Carolina. Her parents farmed tobacco and cotton until they lost their property, and in 1935, her father died of bronchitis. Ava was just 13 years old. Her mother ran a boarding house to support the children, and Ava studied to be a secretary. But while still in her teens, a photograph taken of her by her brother-in-law led to an MGM contract. By 1946, she was already a bona fide star, having been loaned out by MGM to Universal for The Killers. But by then, she'd also already been married and divorced twice. In 1942, she married Mickey Rooney, only to divorce him the following year when he refused to give up his partying lifestyle. 2 years later, she married the bandleader Artie Shaw. They also only lasted a year, with Ava claiming he drove her to drink and the analyst's couch. Her final and most famous marriage was to Frank Sinatra. Their 6-year union was tempestuous, and a classic case of 2 people who couldn't live with each other, but couldn't live without each other. Destined to die childless, Ava did fall pregnant to Sinatra, but had an abortion, saying later, "We couldn't even take care of ourselves. How were we going to take care of a baby?" While films like The Barefoot Contessa, Mogambo, The Sun Also Rises, and Pandora and the Flying Dutchman made the most of her untamed beauty and only increased her popularity, she eventually found America too confining for her tastes. She lived for years in Spain, a fan of bullfighting and friend of Ernest Hemingway, before being forced by tax problems to move to the UK. She spent the last 20 years of her life in London as a partial recluse. She suffered from emphysema and was paralysed by 2 strokes before dying of pneumonia aged 68 in 1990. Frank paid her medical expenses. She'd been the love of his life. Elton John's discography includes 7 consecutive US #1 albums and more than 50 top 40 hits. In 2004, Rolling Stone magazine put him at number 49 on its list of greatest artists of all time.
He's amazing. Like, he's amazing musically, and he can play, and he's like, he has so much like spirit about him. You're walking down the street, you're not going to miss Elton John, you know?
But 40 years at the top of pop have not come without cost to the 5-time Grammy winner, whose personal life and taste for excess have generated more than their fair share of gossip column inches over the course of his career. Back in 1975, while on tour in LA, he allegedly collapsed from a drug overdose. Then, in a frank interview with Rolling Stone magazine, he confessed to being bisexual. In 1984, he blindsided the world by marrying Renate Blauel, a German sound engineer. His last-ditch attempt to hang on to some semblance of heterosexuality may have fooled him, but the media weren't buying it. And in 1987, he took the Sun newspaper to court for claiming he'd engaged in underage sex with a boy. He won the case and said afterwards, "You can call me a fat, balding, talentless old queen who can't sing, but you can't tell lies about me." A year later, he and Renate divorced. Finally, in 1993, it seemed like life was settling down for Elton, after he found love in the arms of advertising executive David Furnish. However, his frustrations with the media reared their ugly head again in 2004 on a trip to Taiwan, where the intrusive behavior of the local paparazzi sent him into a rage.
Don't touch me! Touch me! Yeah, touch you, we'll throw you through the window. We've had a great tour of the forest. We come to Taiwan, and it's thanks to you guys.
Things didn't improve in 2005, when Britain's Daily Mail claimed he'd banned guests from talking to him at his annual tie and tiara ball. He won £100,000 in libel damages, but was powerless to defend himself against appalling reviews of his third Broadway musical, Lestat, which was branded a musical sleeping pill.
You know, a lot of what the critics said was right, a lot of what the critics said wasn't right, but we listened to what they said, and we took the points that we agreed with, and we worked on them. And we worked very, very hard, and I think the result is fantastic.
However, it was all too little too late. The show closed after only 39 performances, the same week that Elton learned his proposed US sitcom had also been canned. Thankfully, the year ended on a much happier note, as Elton tied the knot with David in a suitably lavish ceremony in London, in one of England's first gay marriages under the controversial new law. It was all just another day in the flamboyant and turbulent life of one of the most colourful characters in rock and roll. Now in his 60s, Sir Elton has no regrets.
I honestly feel I couldn't have asked for a better life. I mean, I wanted to be involved in music, whether it was working in a record store, whether it was working at publishers, whether it was writing, whether it was... I didn't envisage ever being a singer. That happened by accident.